The emergency alarms echoed through the massive crystal halls of the Galactic Federation headquarters. Never before had such panic filled these ancient corridors. Ships from 100 different worlds had arrived in desperate haste, their captains carrying news that would shake the very foundation of galactic civilization. Admiral Veltar stood at the center of the Great Council chamber, his blue-scaled hands trembling as he activated the holographic display. The alien commander had fought in 3 galactic wars, survived the collapse of 2 star systems, and earned medals from 40 different planets. But today, fear had broken through his legendary composure, like acid through steel. The hologram came to life, showing a 3-dimensional map of their galaxy. What the council members saw made several of them step backward in horror. Across the outer rim, system after system was marked in blood red, not conquered, not occupied, completely consumed. 17 solar systems, Veltar announced, his voice cracking like ice under pressure. Gone. Not just the planets, not just the colonies, everything. The stars themselves have been drained of energy and left as cold, dead rocks floating in space. The display zoomed in on the most recent attack, where the thriving Katek system had existed just days before. Only empty blackness remained. No debris, no radiation signatures. Nothing but void. The void swarm moves unlike anything we have ever encountered, Veltar continued. Our most advanced plasma cannons might as well be throwing pebbles at a mountain. Energy shields that can stop neutron bombs collapse in minutes against their weapons. They adapt to every strategy we throw at them. Counselor Nithra, an elderly diplomat whose species had survived 5 million years through careful negotiation and advanced technology, stood up slowly. Her voice carried the weight of absolute despair. Admiral, please tell this council truthfully. Do our combined fleets have any chance of stopping this invasion? The silence that followed felt like a physical presence in the room. Veltar looked around at the faces of representatives from the most powerful civilizations in the galaxy. These were species that had mastered faster-than-light travel, built artificial worlds, and created weapons that could crack planets in half. And they were all looking at him with the same expression of helpless terror. No, he whispered. Our conventional forces are useless. The swarm learns from every battle. What worked once never works again. We have lost every major engagement. At their current rate of expansion, they will reach the core worlds within 60 standard days. The council chamber erupted in panicked voices. Some representatives were already activating emergency communication devices to order the evacuation of their homeworlds. Others sat in stunned silence, staring at the holographic display as if willing it to change. Nithra raised her hand for silence. When the chamber quieted, she spoke the words that everyone was thinking but afraid to say. Then we need a miracle, or everything we have built, every world we have protected, every life in this galaxy will be consumed by that darkness. In desperation born of absolute necessity, the Federation did something it had never done before. They broadcast an open distress call across every known frequency, reaching out to any species with the capability to wage war. The message was simple and heartbreaking. To any beings capable of warfare, the galaxy cries out for heroes. We are dying, and we need help. Most civilized worlds received the message and felt only pity for the doomed Federation. Advanced species evacuated their outer territories and prepared for the inevitable. But on a small blue planet, in an unremarkable solar system, the signal was intercepted by a military installation buried deep in a mountain. Lieutenant Colonel Jack Harrison was finishing his night shift at NORAD when the computers started going crazy. The signal was unlike anything in their databases, clearly artificial, but using mathematical principles that seemed almost familiar. After 6 hours of work, the translation program finally cracked the basic structure. When the message played in English, Harrison sat back in his chair and stared at the screen. He read it 3 times before walking to the secure phone. His call woke up General Mike Stevens, but the content of the message made sleep impossible anyway. General, either someone is playing the most elaborate prank in human history, or aliens just asked us for military help. Sir, they sound really scared. Stevens arrived at the facility within an hour. After reviewing the data, he looked at the star maps showing the location of the distress call. So let me understand this correctly. Colonel, an advanced alien civilization that can travel between stars is asking us primitive humans to help them fight a war. Harrison nodded. That is exactly what they are asking, sir. And based on this message, if we do not help them, they are all going to die. Stevens was quiet for a long moment, thinking about the implications. Then he smiled grimly. Well then, Colonel, it looks like humanity just got invited to its first galactic war. Time to show these aliens what Deathworlders can do. The massive Federation staging area had never seen anything quite like what emerged from hyperspace that Tuesday morning. Ships from dozens of worlds filled the orbital docks, each one a masterpiece of advanced engineering with smooth hulls that gleamed like polished mirrors and energy signatures that hummed with barely contained power. Then came the human ship. It looked like someone had taken a cargo freighter, welded extra fuel tanks to the sides, and strapped on engines that were definitely not designed for that particular hull. Scorch marks covered the outer plating, and several panels appeared to be held on with some kind of metallic tape. The whole thing wobbled slightly as it approached the docking bay, making veteran alien pilots wince at what they assumed was poor piloting. Admiral Veltar watched through the observation deck as the human vessel attempted to dock. The ship scraped against the docking clamps twice, before finally settling into place with a grinding noise that made everyone nearby check their emergency oxygen supplies. Black smoke poured from one of the engines. Perhaps we should have been more specific in our requirements, muttered Commander Zeph, a tactical officer from the Andorian fleet. These beings appear to have barely mastered basic spaceflight. The airlock finally opened with a hiss that sounded suspiciously like escaping gas. What stepped out was not what any of the assembled alien officers had expected. Instead of advanced warriors in powered armor, or exotic beings with natural weapons, they saw humans wearing simple green and brown clothing that looked like it was made from plant fibers. Commander Lisa Parker walked down the ramp with the confidence of someone who belonged exactly where she was. She carried what appeared to be a metal tube with a wooden handle, and her equipment looked like it had been assembled in someone's garage rather than a high-tech military facility. Admiral Veltar approached carefully, still hoping this was some kind of misunderstanding. Welcome to Federation Staging Area 7. You are the military reinforcements that Earth promised to send. Parker looked around at the assembled alien technology, the floating platforms, the energy weapons, and the ships that could probably destroy planets. Then she grinned. Yes, sir. We are the first wave. Got about 200 Marines, 50 Navy SEALs, a company of Rangers, and some support personnel. More ships are coming behind us. The alien admiral tried to hide his disappointment. 200 soldiers. The Federation had lost entire fleets numbering in the thousands. And your equipment? Well, we brought what we could fit, Parker replied, gesturing back toward the ship. Standard infantry weapons, some heavy machine guns, rocket launchers, and about 10,000 tons of various explosives. Had to leave the tanks behind, but we figured we could work with whatever you folks have available. The alien officers exchanged looks that clearly said they were wondering if this was some kind of joke. These humans had no visible energy shields, no floating platforms, no weapons that glowed with contained energy. Everything they carried appeared to be made of metal and wood, like museum pieces from a primitive civilization. Captain Dave Rodriguez began unpacking equipment from large metal boxes. He pulled out what looked like a mechanical device with a long metal tube and a curved piece underneath. The whole thing appeared to operate on some kind of chemical combustion system, like something their ancestors might have used hundreds of years ago. Commander Zeph leaned over to examine the weapon more closely. Forgive me, but that appears to be a very primitive projectile weapon. Does it fire solid metal slugs using chemical propellant? Rodriguez looked up with genuine enthusiasm. This old thing. Yeah, she fires a 7.62mm round at about 800 meters per second. Effective range is about 600 meters, but I have personally made kills at twice that distance. He patted the weapon fondly. But this is just for close work. Wait until you see what we brought for the real fighting. The aliens watched in growing confusion as the humans continued unpacking. Instead of energy weapons, they pulled out more metal tubes of various sizes. Instead of personal shields, they strapped on thick fabric vests. Instead of advanced targeting systems, they attached simple glass scopes to their weapons. I do not understand, Admiral Veltar said finally. The Void Swarm has adaptive armor that absorbs energy weapons and deflects plasma charges. Their hulls can withstand direct hits from our most powerful cannons. How do you expect these primitive weapons to be effective? Parker and Rodriguez exchanged a look that the aliens would later recognize as distinctly human. It was the expression of predators who had just been told their prey was dangerous. Admiral Parker said, her voice taking on a tone that made several alien officers step backward instinctively. We have been fighting wars on our planet for thousands of years. We have learned some things about killing that your energy weapons and plasma cannons cannot teach you. Rodriguez held up his rifle. This weapon has been refined through decades of combat. It is simple, reliable, and effective. When your fancy energy guns stop working because the enemy adapted to them, this will still put holes in whatever needs holes put in it. During the tactical briefing that followed, the alien commanders displayed holographic images of the Void Swarm's capabilities. They showed how the mechanical entities could absorb energy attacks, adapt their armor to resist specific weapons, and counter any strategy within minutes of first encountering it. Most species had looked at this information and given up hope. The humans pulled out primitive paper notebooks and started taking notes, asking detailed questions about structural weak points, energy distribution systems, and mechanical vulnerabilities. You still believe you can fight these entities? Admiral Veltar asked. Fight them. Captain Rodriguez grinned, checking the action on his weapon. Admiral, we are going to teach them why humans are the only species on our planet that hunts for sport. The Federation's battle plan was textbook perfect. 3 cruiser squadrons would approach the Void Swarm patrol group in a standard diamond formation, engage at maximum range with plasma cannons, and retreat if the enemy showed signs of adaptation. It was the same strategy that had failed dozens of times before. But it was all they knew how to do. Major Tom Wilson listened to the briefing with the patience of a man who had no intention of following orders. He sat in the back of the command center, studying the tactical display, while the alien officers discussed approach vectors and energy weapon frequencies. When they finished explaining their plan, Wilson stood up and cleared his throat. With respect, Admiral, that is not going to work, he said simply. You are going to get a lot of good people killed, and those swarm ships are going to adapt to your weapons, just like they always do. Admiral Veltar turned around with obvious irritation. Then what do you suggest, Major? Your people have been here for exactly 4 days. Wilson walked to the holographic display and pointed at the enemy formation. We do not engage them at long range. We get close, real close. Close enough to touch them. The alien commanders looked at each other with expressions that clearly said they thought the human had lost his mind. Commander Zeph spoke for all of them. Major, our ships cannot survive at close range. The swarm's weapons will tear us apart before we can return fire. Your ships, yes, Wilson agreed. But we are not talking about using your ships. What happened next would be discussed in Federation military academies for the next 100 years. While the alien cruisers engaged the swarm patrol group, according to their careful plan, the human transport ship broke formation and accelerated directly toward the enemy vessels. Not toward an intercept course or a flanking position, but straight at them like a missile aimed at a target. The Federation officers watched in horror as the human ship took hit after hit from swarm weapons. Hull plates blew off in chunks. Entire sections vented atmosphere into space. Any rational crew would have retreated or been killed by the devastating barrage. Instead, the human ship rammed directly into the side of the largest swarm vessel. Admiral Veltar stared at his tactical display. In complete shock. They committed suicide. Those insane humans just killed themselves and accomplished nothing. Then his communications officer spoke up with confusion in his voice. "Sir, I am receiving transmissions from inside the swarm ship. The humans are still alive." The answer came over the radio in a voice that sounded far too calm for someone who had just crashed a spaceship into an enemy vessel. "Breacher Team 1 is inside the target. Beginning demolition procedures. We have about 20 minutes of air left, so let us make this quick." It was Sergeant Amy Foster, and she was reporting from inside the enemy ship like she was giving a routine status update. The alien officers listened in amazement as she coordinated her team through the swarm vessel's corridors, placing explosive charges at structural weak points that their ship sensors had identified during the suicidal approach. "How are they moving through the ship?" Commander Zeph asked. "There is no atmosphere inside those vessels, no gravity, no life support systems." Sergeant Admiral Veltar called over the radio. "How are your people surviving in those conditions?" Foster's response came between the sounds of running footsteps and what sounded like metal being cut with power tools. "Well, sir, we can hold our breath for about 30 seconds in hard vacuum before we pass out. The cold is not great, but these suits will keep us alive for maybe 20 minutes. That is plenty of time to plant explosives and get back to our ship." The alien commanders realized with growing horror that the humans had deliberately crashed into the enemy vessel, knowing they would have only minutes to work in the deadly environment of space. They were operating in conditions that would kill most species instantly, treating it like a routine military operation. "Charges are set," Foster reported. "Team is back aboard our ship. Everyone might want to back away from the target." The explosion that followed was unlike anything the Federation forces had ever seen in space combat. Instead of the clean energy discharge of plasma weapons, it was a dirty, brutal blast that tore the swarm vessel apart from the inside. Metal fragments scattered in all directions. Secondary explosions rippled through the ship's hull as internal systems overloaded, but the humans were not finished. While the Federation cruisers were still trying to process what they had just witnessed, 2 more human teams were already approaching the remaining swarm vessels using the same impossible tactics. Captain Ben Hayes coordinated the second attack from the human command ship, watching the tactical display with the satisfaction of a man who knew exactly how this was going to end. "Breacher Team 2, you are cleared for approach. Remember, these are chemical explosives, not energy weapons. Put them right against the structural supports." The second swarm vessel died the same way as the first, torn apart by explosions that its adaptive systems could not counter because they had never been designed to handle such primitive weapons. The third vessel tried to retreat, but the humans had anticipated that as well. "Interceptor Team, take out their engines," Hayes ordered. "Same approach, but focus on their propulsion systems." Admiral Veltar watched 3 void swarm vessels get destroyed in what should have been a routine patrol encounter. The enemy ships that had been adapting to Federation energy weapons for months were helpless against the human approach. They had no defense against boarding parties that treated vacuum exposure like a minor inconvenience, and no countermeasures for chemical explosives placed directly against their hull. When the battle was over, the human casualties were exactly what their commanders had expected. 12 dead, 37 injured, most from vacuum exposure and radiation poisoning. The aliens were horrified by the losses. The humans treated it as an acceptable exchange rate. Major Wilson, Admiral Veltar, called over the radio. Your tactics are completely insane. You lost good people in that attack. Wilson's response came without hesitation. Yes, sir, we did. But we also just proved that the Void Swarm can be killed. Your energy weapons cannot touch them, but a kilogram of C4 in the right place will blow them to pieces just like anything else. The Federation commanders finally understood what they were dealing with. These humans did not fight wars the way civilized species fought wars. They fought like predators who had spent thousands of years learning how to kill things that were bigger, stronger, and better armed than they were. And they were very, very good at it. News traveled fast through the Federation fleet, and the stories that came back from the first joint operations sounded like impossible fairy tales. Veteran alien commanders who had fought the Void Swarm for months without a single victory were hearing reports that made them question their own sanity. Colonel Rachel Mitchell had taken a squad of human engineers to examine the Federation's mining equipment on a supply asteroid. What she saw there gave her an idea that would have gotten her court-martialed in any sensible military. The mining lasers were designed to slice through solid rock, powered by the same energy cells that fed Federation starships. Why are we not using these as weapons? She asked the Deltan supply officer. Because they are mining tools, he replied, confused. They are not designed for combat. They have no targeting systems, no range capability, and no defensive applications. Mitchell looked at the massive laser array that could cut through a mountain in minutes. I think you are looking at this wrong. 3 days later, a Federation mining platform approached a Void Swarm patrol group. The alien commanders watching from their cruisers expected to witness another hopeless defeat. Instead, they saw the mining lasers slice through swarm armor like it was made of paper. The industrial-grade cutting beams were so powerful that the enemy's adaptive systems could not absorb the energy fast enough to prevent catastrophic damage. The human solution was brutally simple. If regular ship weapons were not strong enough, use bigger weapons. If bigger weapons were not available, take whatever was available and make it bigger. Meanwhile, Commander Ryan Clark was solving a different problem in his own uniquely human way. The Federation had thousands of civilian transport ships fleeing from swarm-controlled systems. These vessels had no weapons, minimal armor, and engines designed for cargo hauling rather than combat maneuvering. Clark looked at these transports and saw guided missiles. His plan was so insane that it took 3 meetings with Federation Command before they finally agreed to let him try it. Load a transport ship with explosives, aim it at a swarm vessel, and evacuate the crew at the last possible second, using emergency pods. The explosion will destroy both ships, protested a Centauri tactical officer. You are proposing to sacrifice valuable vessels for a 1-to-1 exchange rate. No, Clark corrected. I am proposing to sacrifice empty cargo haulers to destroy enemy warships. That is not a 1-to-1 exchange. That is winning. The first successful transport missile attack destroyed a swarm heavy cruiser that had been terrorizing Federation supply lines for weeks. The second attack took out 3 smaller vessels that were caught in the blast radius. By the fourth attack, word was spreading through the fleet that the humans had found a way to turn their weakness into strength. The alien officers began to understand something disturbing about their new allies. A Deltan commander, watching Clark's team prepare another transport for its final mission, made an observation that would be quoted in military reports for decades afterward. These humans fight like they want to die, he said, his voice filled with a mixture of admiration and horror. Admiral Veltborough, who had been studying human military history in his spare time, corrected him. No, Commander, they fight like they are already dead. That is what makes them so dangerous. They have accepted death before the battle begins, so they can focus entirely on completing their mission. The Admiral had spent weeks reading about human conflicts, trying to understand how a species could be so effective at warfare while using such primitive technology. What he learned explained everything. Humans had spent their entire history fighting other humans, each side constantly adapting and evolving new ways to kill their enemies. They had been forced to become creative, ruthless, and willing to sacrifice everything for victory. The real turning point came when Lieutenant Colonel Kate Adams proposed something that made even the battle-hardened human officers pause. The swarm had deployed a massive command ship to coordinate their forces in the sector. It was heavily armored, surrounded by escort vessels, and protected by adaptive shields that had deflected every Federation attack for the past month. Adams studied the tactical reports and came to the same conclusion that every other commander had reached. The command ship was untouchable using conventional tactics, so she proposed unconventional ones. We load every transport we can find with explosives and ram them all into the command ship at the same time. While their defenses are dealing with that, we send boarding parties through the breaches and plant charges directly on their central processor. The Federation tactical staff stared at her in shocked silence. Finally, Commander Zeph found his voice. "Colonel, that plan is suicide. You are proposing to sacrifice dozens of ships and hundreds of lives in a single attack." Adams shrugged with the casual indifference that alien officers were learning to associate with human military planning. "Yes, it probably is suicide, but it will work." She was right. The coordinated attack overwhelmed the swarm command ship's defenses through sheer volume, while the adaptive systems were trying to counter dozens of simultaneous impacts. Human boarding parties were already inside the vessel, moving through the corridors with their characteristic disregard for personal safety. The destruction of the command ship had an immediate effect on the entire swarm fleet. Without central coordination, the mechanical entities began making tactical errors. They retreated when they should have advanced, and attacked when they should have withdrawn. For the first time since the war began, Federation forces were winning battles, but the humans were not finished adapting alien technology to their own purposes. They took Federation energy shields and used them to protect boarding parties during ramming attacks. They modified alien sensors to guide their improvised missiles with deadly accuracy. They turned defensive systems into offensive weapons and peaceful tools into instruments of war. The mechanical void swarm, with all their adaptive capabilities and advanced technology, had been designed to fight civilized opponents who followed logical military strategies. They had no programming to deal with enemies who treated every battle like a suicide mission and found creative ways to turn any available equipment into weapons. As human forces began achieving impossible victories across multiple sectors, one thing became clear to every observer. The tide of the war had turned, and it had turned because someone had finally brought Deathworlders to a galactic conflict. The Nexus Point was not just another battlefield. It was the heart of everything the Void Swarm had built, a massive structure floating in deep space that coordinated every mechanical horror across dozens of star systems. Federation intelligence had spent months trying to locate it, following energy signatures and tracking communication patterns through the dark void between galaxies. When they finally found it, the sight made even veteran commanders lose hope. The Nexus Point was larger than most space stations, protected by layers of adaptive armor and surrounded by more swarm vessels than the Federation had seen in one place during the entire war. Energy readings showed defensive systems that could vaporize entire fleets before they got within weapons range. General James Carter stood on the bridge of what had once been a Federation heavy cruiser, now converted into something that looked like it had been assembled in a scrapyard by someone with more enthusiasm than sense. Human engineers had bolted additional armor plating to the hull, welded extra weapon mounts wherever they could find space, and somehow managed to fit engines that were definitely not designed for that particular ship. The command center was a mixture of alien holographic displays and human equipment that looked like it belonged in a 20th century war movie. Cables ran across the floor, connecting Federation computers to human communications gear. The whole setup had the appearance of something that might explode at any moment, which was probably accurate. Carter looked around at the faces of his officers, men and women who had volunteered for a mission that everyone understood was a one-way trip. They had come from Earth, knowing they might never see home again, but they had come anyway because that was what humans did when someone needed help. "All right, people," Carter announced, his voice carrying the calm authority of a man who had already accepted what was going to happen. "This is it. We punch through their outer defenses, get close enough to deliver the payload, and hope we are every bit as crazy as they think we are." The plan was typical human military strategy, which meant it was completely insane and would probably work. Instead of trying to fight through the Nexus Point's defenses, they were going to ram everything they had directly into the structure, while boarding parties fought their way to the Central Command Core. Lieutenant Rebecca Stone checked her equipment one final time, making sure her explosive charges were properly secured. She had volunteered to lead the first boarding party, which meant she would be among the first humans to set foot inside the Nexus Point. It also meant she had about a 5% chance of surviving the next hour. "Stone, you sure about this?" Carter asked, knowing it was a pointless question. "General, I have been training for this kind of operation my entire career," she replied with the confidence of someone who had spent years learning how to fight in impossible situations. "Besides, someone has to go first." The assault began exactly as every human military operation began, with controlled chaos that looked like disaster to outside observers but was actually precisely coordinated mayhem. The converted human flagship accelerated directly toward the Nexus Point, while dozens of smaller vessels spread out in attack formations that made no sense according to conventional military doctrine. The Void Swarm's defensive systems activated immediately, sending beams of energy that could destroy planets toward the approaching human fleet. But the humans had learned something during their months of fighting the mechanical invaders. The swarm's weapons were designed to counter large, well-armored targets. They were not optimized for dealing with dozens of small, fast-moving objects that seemed determined to get themselves destroyed. Colonel Mark Thompson coordinated the kamikaze runs from a transport that had been loaded with enough explosives to level a city. His job was to make sure the volunteers reached their targets, and his volunteers were exactly the kind of people you would expect to volunteer for suicide missions. They were soldiers who had seen what the Void Swarm did to inhabited worlds, and they were angry about it. "Transport 7, you are cleared for final approach," Thompson called over the radio, watching as another converted civilian vessel accelerated toward the Nexus Point's defensive perimeter. "Make it count." The response came back immediately, filled with the grim humor that human soldiers use to deal with impossible situations. "Copy that, Colonel. See you on the other side." Transport 7 exploded against the Nexus Point's outer hull with enough force to crack the massive structure's armor plating. The blast created a breach large enough for Stone's boarding party to get inside, which had been the entire point of the sacrifice, while the outer defenses were dealing with kamikaze attacks from multiple directions. Stone led her team through the breach and into the mechanical hell inside the Nexus Point. The corridors were filled with defensive systems that would have stopped any civilized species, but the humans had brought equipment specifically designed for this kind of close-quarters fighting. "Boarding Party 1 is inside," Stone reported, her voice calm despite the fact that she was currently fighting her way through a maze of automated weapons and mechanical guardians, beginning advance toward the central core. The battle inside the Nexus Point was everything the galaxy had learned to expect from human military operations. It was brutal, desperate, and conducted with a complete disregard for personal safety that terrified their enemies and amazed their allies. Stone's team fought through corridors that were never designed for biological life forms, using chemical explosives to blast through barriers that energy weapons could not touch. Meanwhile, Commander Eric Johnson was making his way toward the central core with a device that represented humanity's final answer to the Void Swarm problem. It was a modified nuclear warhead, enhanced with Federation technology, and designed to be placed directly against the Nexus Point's primary processor. The plan was simple, and the way that human plans were simple. Get close enough to the central core, plant the device, and detonate it before the swarm's defensive systems could stop them. The fact that anyone within 50 kilometers of the explosion would be instantly vaporized was considered an acceptable trade-off. "Command, this is Johnson," he reported as he reached the central core chamber. "Device is in position, requesting final authorization." Carter's voice came over the radio, carrying the weight of a decision that would either save the galaxy or doom it. "Authorization granted. Commander, do it." Johnson looked at the massive mechanical structure that controlled billions of Void Swarm entities across dozens of star systems. For a moment, he thought about everyone who had died fighting these mechanical horrors. All the worlds that had been consumed, all the lives that had been lost. For everyone who could not fight back, he said quietly, and triggered the detonation. The explosion tore through the Nexus Point like a miniature star, destroying the central core and sending shock waves through the massive structure. Across the galaxy, Void Swarm entities suddenly stopped their attacks, their coordination severed. Without central command, they began retreating into the dark space between galaxies. Their invasion finally broken. Admiral Veltar found General Carter in the medical bay hours later, recovering from radiation exposure that should have killed him. The human general was conscious but weak, his body paying the price for standing too close to humanity's final gambit. "General, your people have earned a place of honor in the Federation," the Admiral said, his voice filled with respect. "That had been earned through months of impossible victories." Carter managed a weak smile. "Just glad we could help, Admiral. That is what humans do. Someone calls for help, we answer." The galaxy had cried out for heroes, and the Deathworlders from Earth had answered that call. They had proven that sometimes salvation does not come from the most advanced civilizations or the most sophisticated technology, but from the worlds that forge warriors in the fires of endless conflict.